Hey everyone, happy Pride Month and welcome to Queerly Recommended, the podcast where we recommend queer books, films, TV shows, and more. I'm Tara Scott and I review sapphic fiction to the Lesbian Review and Smart Bitches Trashy Books. This week, my co-host and amazing sapphic romance author Kris Bryant can't make it, so I'm here by myself with a minisode for you. As always, I just want to thank everyone who supports us through our coffee, through our newsletter on Substack. There's links to both in the show notes. And okay, so like I said, this is a mini-sode. I'm only here for a little bit for you. We didn't want to leave you hanging. Kris and I talked about it. And we thought maybe what we can do is share some of my favorite podcasts because maybe I'll inspire you to check out something that you haven't listened to before. So take that hour that you would normally spend with us this week and go check out something else. I have 5 of my very favorite podcasts. So the first one is Maintenance Phase. It has Aubrey Gordon and Michael Hobbs, both queer. And Michael Hobbs is an investigative journalist. Aubrey Gordon is the author of a couple of incredible books about fatness. She started out as Your Fat Friend, writing that column. The thing that I really love about it is that it gets into debunking a lot of the bullshit around the wellness industry and weight loss things. Like, it started with a big focus on weight loss, but not only that. And so they have kind of a wide range of either myth busting or debunking things, like I said. They also do some fun episodes, and sometimes they do dives into diet books or personalities. And so given that it's a fairly wide range, I'm going to give you 3 episodes that you can use as starting points, but really you can jump in at any time. I mean, my starting point was when they were talking about Rachel Hollis, just because I remember a lot of people dunking on her at that time. I found that interesting. But unless you're into Rachel Hollis and dunking on her, that's not where I recommend you start. The first one, a really fun episode, was one of the early ones about snake oil. And, you know, we've all heard about snake oil as a concept, this idea that you're buying some kind of a miracle cure, but it doesn't actually really do anything. And they go into the history. So the idea is that for each episode, one person shows up prepared, the other person doesn't know anything about it. So Aubrey showed up prepared for this one, and where I got intrigued, and hopefully I'll intrigue you, is she says it was real and it worked. So it explains what the actual real snake oil was and how that led to an industry of hucksterism. Another episode that I highly recommend, and actually if you only check out one, this might be the one for you, is an episode that's titled The Body Mass Index. And it's a deep dive into why the body mass index, or the BMI, is terrible for determining if a person is overweight or obese. She shares about the history, where it came from, what it was actually intended for in the first place, how it got warped into this measure that we all hear about from our doctors, and even, you know, changes to it in the, I think it was the 80s, maybe the 90s, and why people who were normal weight all of a sudden were no longer in that classification. They were deemed overweight or obese. So absolutely check that one out. And if you want just another fun one, there's one called Diet Book Deep Dive, Angela Lansbury's Positive Moves. I was a little afraid that we would hear about Angela Lansbury being pretty problematic, but it's actually a really lovely episode, so it's a great entry point in as well. So that's the first one. Maintenance Phase, hands down, this is my very favorite. If I could only listen to one podcast for the rest of my life, that's probably the one I'd be listening to. My second podcast that I recommend is called If Books Could Kill, and it actually has Michael Hobbs again, and his co-host Peter is from another podcast that I think is called 5-1. It's about legal-related things. Peter's a lawyer. I've never checked out 5-1, but it's probably great because Peter is great. But with If Books Could Kill, they cover what they call airport books. So what are those books that blow up so big that they are just absolutely ubiquitous? You see them everywhere. You see them at the airports. So you can do a choose your own adventure with this one because you've almost certainly heard about any of the books that have been there. But again, if you look at it and you think, oh man, there's so many good ones, how do I choose? Some of my personal favorites were when they talked about men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I loved the one about the 5 love languages. And also the one about the 4-hour work week. I mean, if you, like me, work in tech and you're so tired of all the people turning themselves into like LinkedIn influencers and, come to my course and all the information is shallow, it all makes sense once you either read the 4-hour work week, or even better, don't read that book. Just listen to Michael and Peter talk about it. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is also, the episode for that was kind of mind-blowing. Super loved it. And just like with Maintenance Phase, very interesting, very informative. They do deep dive research into the books that they're talking about, but also hilarious. The vibe is great between these people, so really love it. Can't recommend it enough. My third recommendation is going to be for the folks that are a little bit more on the geeky side. It is called A More Civilized Age, and it has a few people who are absolutely fabulous talking about the Star Wars franchise. They really get into it, and it's all the visual media. So it starts with the terrible prequel, the first 2 prequel movies. Where I'm listening, I'm still in where they're talking about the Clone Wars animated series, but they take a really, really progressive lens. I appreciate when they tie themes and events in the films and shows to real world events. They do a great job of that. And I went and I looked at the reviews on Apple Podcasts, and somebody called it the best, most thoughtful, and intelligent Star Wars podcast on the internet. Full stop. I could not agree more. This is one that, because their episodes, they have probably 70 something, I think, at this point. And the episodes are also quite long. So this is one that I like to put on when I'm going to be out doing something for a while and I have a good long while to listen to something. If I'm out gardening for a couple of hours, that's a good one that I like to throw on to listen to. The next one. Okay, I'm on my 4th of 5. The next podcast that I recommend is called Better Offline. It's hosted by Ed Zitron, and he is covering how the tech industry is manipulating society. And he talks a lot about how, the growth at all costs model that we've seen, especially like in Silicon Valley, but it's been a big part of our commerce, how it's driving some pretty terrible behaviors. Does that sound kind of dire? Maybe. Kind of, you might feel that way about it. But for myself, like I said, I work in tech. I found it kind of comforting and very helpful because it explains a lot of things. We think the internet is worse, and yes, it absolutely is, and we're learning why. Like, when I say the internet, I mean accessing information on the internet, especially via Google. He recently had a few episodes about this. So the first one is how managers are breaking the internet. The next one is the man that destroyed Google search. There's some great ones about OpenAI and why they're problematic. I listened to one recently about how we're watching Facebook die. So like, if you've been using these tech services and you feel like they're getting shittier and shittier in a way that they're like more broken, you're right. That is what's happening. And if you want to make sense of it, this is a really great way to go. And probably the best primer is one of his first episodes called The Rot Economy, featuring Robert Evans. Robert Evans is from the show Behind the Bastards, which is also one of my favorites, but that has a lot of heartbreaking stuff. So I'm not including that here today. But yes, Better Offline. Very, I think it's, really well researched. He's really good at putting things together and helping make sense of it. The last one that I'm going to recommend is actually my bedtime listening sometimes. I don't know about the rest of you, but I can be prone to thoughts that race kind of closer towards bedtime. If I want to give my brain enough to focus on, but, learn something and chill out, my favorite podcast for that is called The History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. I stumbled on this one because I realized I wanted to learn more about philosophy, but I don't have a lot of patience for reading nonfiction. For whatever reason, my brain gets extremely excited by fiction and treats nonfiction like poison most of the time. And, well, philosophy absolutely fits within that. So I was trying to think, what's a more accessible way for me to take in philosophy? And, was looking for podcasts and came across this one. It's extremely well respected in the philosophy realm. It's hosted by a guy named, I think his name's Peter Adams or Peter Adamson. I can't remember, but it's definitely Peter. He has the most chill voice, but he also makes these little jokes and they're really endearing. And it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It is the history of philosophy without any gaps. So, we've all heard of Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, and then maybe we've heard of Descartes. Like, it just jumps centuries before we get to people that we know. And he pauses and says, okay, but what about all of the in-between? Obviously, there's not this 1,000-year gap in philosophy. There are people who are building on Aristotle and Plato and the like. So, what are they saying? And I've listened to, 50 or 60 episodes, and there's over 500. They're only about 20 minutes each, but they're just great for learning in an accessible way without exciting your brain too much. So definitely check that out if you need some bedtime reading. Listening. So there you have it. That's 5 other podcasts you can try out while you wait for our next regular episode. Just to recap, that's Maintenance Phase, If Books Could Kill, A More Civilized Age, Better Off Online, and History of Philosophy without any gaps. But before I go, because I know you're all about the recommendations of queer fiction, and yes, I gave you 2 queer podcasts, but I do actually have an official recommendation for you today, because I recently read a book and I enjoyed it so much that I just couldn't wait for Kris to come back to talk about it. So, what could that possibly be? It is a paranormal historical romance. It is called Blood Remains by Cathy Pegau. So, imagine this. The year is 1931. Callie Payne is a butcher and a blood mage, and she lives with her grandmother. After a decade away, she recently returned to Seattle when her husband died and her in-laws discovered the nature of her magic. And really, that gives you a good idea of how magic users are sometimes viewed in this version of Seattle, especially the blood mages. When Callie was young, she was part of the Jackson Street Roses gang. And she thought she'd left crime behind when she got married and moved away until, the story opens and we see the leader of the Roses come into her butcher's shop. And it's her, it's not just the leader of the Roses, it's also her childhood crush, EJ. EJ is there because she needs help. She has a thorn in her side, and his name is Paul Underwood. Paul Underwood is a gangster, and he's trying to take over EJ's territory. He is known as an all-around terrible person. And Callie's not super sure at first, but she's persuaded fairly quickly when EJ tells her that Underwood was responsible for killing one of the Roses that, one of the girls that used to run with them when they were young. So Callie is inclined to help, but she knows that things can go very, very badly for her if she violates the magic laws that forbid intentional harm. So she has to be extremely careful in choosing the right spell. So, she does some digging through the spells that she knows. She consults her grandmother. She consults her mentor and, lands on Repel. Repel should be fine, right? That's not going to cause direct harm. That's just going to prevent him from coming into EJ's bar. But when Underwood is found dead, a few days after this 3-day spell is cast, and, the spell was cast, he came and he threatened Callie because he somehow knew that she had done it. And a few days later, he's dead, and the murder scene is full of magic. So the local police and the magic authorities, of course, think that Callie and EJ killed him. So the questions are, can they find the killer before this person does more harm? And what should they do about all these renewed feelings they have for each other when there's a killer on the loose? Friends, this book is fabulous. I really enjoyed the world building around the magic especially, and how we get to see this version of, it's historic Seattle with magic overlaid. And I think for me, it was really great to see it through the lens of Callie, because I loved seeing, she's a blood mage and she's a butcher by trade. And so there's these complementary skills, but she also has to be really conscientious with what she does with it, because there are these, authorities that stay on top of what people are doing with their magic. Are they doing the right things? Are they following the covenant that's been signed that allows them to hang out with the non-magic people? I also appreciate that, this is big time. This is a found family story. The Roses have always been each other's family. They still are today. Yes, okay, Callie left. She got married. She left them behind, but they welcome her back with open arms. And I really, I found it special learning too how, Callie lives with her grandmother. Well, her grandmother was one of the few people who really showed love and care to EJ. And that's, she still cares about her to this, like, whatever is the present day in the book. I also was delighted that this found family, like, they're a girl gang. And I thought that was a really fun touch with it being in the 1930s. It was really easy to imagine EJ as this powerful, brilliant gangster, and she has legitimate businesses and totally illegitimate businesses. And of course, because you all know, I love a good romance novel. I especially enjoyed this take on the friends to lovers romance. It was really sweet how they clearly had feelings for each other in their youth. They weren't discussing it, though, at the time, which again makes sense given its setting. But as they reconnect, the chemistry is just so good. And we see their attraction and their affection coming on stronger than it had ever been before. And I loved the realization on both sides that their feelings are reciprocated. So, if you're looking for a book that has magic, intrigue, and a lovely friends to lovers romance, I definitely recommend Blood Remains by Cathy Pegau. So that's all for this minisode. I hope you've enjoyed. I know it's a new format, so if you have any thoughts, let us know on Twitter. You can also email us at podcast@queerlyrecommended.com to let us know what you think. If you've enjoyed this and you haven't subscribed yet, wherever you listen to podcasts, please hit that little subscribe button on your app so that you get notified when we release an episode. If you have a friend that you think would like our recommendations, please tell them all about it. If you want to support us, we have links in our show notes to our coffee and our newsletter sign up. You can also connect with us on your favorite social media sites. There's links in the show notes to that too. That is all. Goodbye, everybody. Pause for water. I don't even know what that accent was. It was ridiculous.